We've been talking about the SAVE Act, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, being discussed and debated right now in Washington, D.C., amongst our lawmakers, as there is a push to bring more safeguards and security to our federal election process. And we've been bringing you the arguments from both sides. And today we have someone who is going to help bring some context to the situation. We have the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, Ken Cuccinelli, who is also the former Virginia Attorney General, who is joining us here this morning. We appreciate you for taking the time and talking to us about a topic that has become quite controversial here within our nation's capital and could impact the country. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So my first question to you is this. We'll just start off, we've been explaining exactly what this bill would do, but could you provide some context for people in as best layman terms as possible, how this bill would work as currently stated if it were to be enacted as law?
So, as it currently stands, the Save America Act does two things. One, it provides a mechanism for proof of citizenship for people registering to vote in federal elections. Now, it is currently federal law that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in our elections, but there's no way to enforce it. And that's a result of earlier federal laws combined with federal court rulings. So only Washington can fix that mistake, that set of mistakes, really. And so that's one piece of it, is ensuring American citizens are voting in American elections. The second is the requirement for photo ID as a condition of voting. Now, most states already have this in one form or another, but this would apply it to all federal elections. And both of these are very popular. You mentioned it's controversial in Washington. That's true. It's controversial in Washington, but it is not controversial outside Washington. I mean, organizations as reliably left of center as CNN have been reporting over 70% of Democrats support elements of this bill. So we'll see what the Senate does with it. They are openly debating it to a degree and an extent that is somewhat rare for the Senate, and we're glad to see that. And it really does seem to be moving the needle.
Yeah, it has been quite the debate right now. We were playing prior to bringing you on. We had comments from Democratic Senator Mark Warner, and then we were listening to Republican leaders as well, multiple sharing their thoughts on this as well, similar to what you were saying as far as what they want to see in this. I want to ask you just about the need. You mentioned there wanting to make sure that it is U.S. citizens who are voting in U.S. elections. And I know one of the debates from those who oppose is that this is not as big of an issue that we've seen, but the push has been it could still be influential in elections. Could you expound a little bit on why this is needed at this particular time?
Well, we just saw election fraud in Alabama of maybe 16 or 20 votes that flipped an election. And convictions were just entered in the last week or so. This does happen. I've won one of my races for the Virginia State Senate in a recount. Virginia in the last 20 years has had several recounts at the statewide level. So we've had some very, very close races in our state, and as have others. And the view that we have at the Election Transparency Initiative is that when it's all said and done, we want everyone to be able to trust the outcome of elections, to have confidence that only Americans were voting in American elections and that the people voting were who they said they were. I think that's why this is so popular among ordinary Americans in polling across the board. CBS just released a poll today that had 80% support. Across every demographic, the support was overwhelming. Even Democrats were 2-to-1 supportive. So I think Americans are used to some of these mechanisms for securing other parts of their life. And I think they're a bit astonished when they learn that our elections are not secured similarly to, showing an ID when you travel or having to prove you're a citizenship or here eligible to work to get a job when you fill out an I-9 form with a new job. Some basic things in American life, but not for voting. And we hope the SAVE Act will fix that.
We've heard Democrats say that they are not going to budge, and we know it needs 60 votes within the Senate to get by. And a part of what they have been saying is that it could leave millions of Americans who currently don't have, say, a passport, who that they could potentially be left out of the equation here, which brings up the question. There's been a lot of back and forth on what the bill does include and what it does not include. From your understanding,
Yeah.
could you break that down to some of the things that you've heard are in it that may not be in the bill?
So you raised one. People won't be able to get a photo ID. Well, they're doing it all over. And interestingly, none of these senators object to real ID requirements for travel, which have been coming for a decade and a half and have now kicked in. We also have citizenship requirements that, in fact, were in a bill HR 1 in 2021 that got out of the House but did not pass the Senate, would have effectively decriminalized non-citizens voting in elections, as a practical matter. It didn't formally do it, but it would take the government's ability to punish people away. And so I keep hearing this. People can't get these documents. But we're doing it already. In Virginia, for example, like virtually all other states, at a point in time when we required identification, when that state law was passed, part of the law required the state government to go to folks who couldn't get to an election office, sort of a mobile election official, and also um, required assistance, meaning to make this free for anybody who thought they couldn't afford an ID. So states have a lot of experience lowering these hurdles. That's what I did when I was a state legislator. That's part of our job. And to the extent there are unique circumstances on a state by state basis, we do expect state legislatures to step in and ease this process. We want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat. And the Save America Act helps us get there.
So when it comes to, because I appreciate you breaking that down there as well. I know one of the questions I know I personally have. Um, some of the questions that people have is whether or not, again, could they use their driver's license? I think a part of it was if you switch more to a passport, that's a proof of citizenship, which again goes to the proof of being
Yeah.
American along with the photo ID. But some of the concerns people have had is, if you've applied for a passport, sometimes it takes a while. Are there some things, if
Right.
this were to go through, that may need to change from a time standpoint? Someone gets close to election season and they are trying to vote. They can't get their hands on a passport in amount of time. Are there already those conversations and talks in case this does go through that maybe those things can change from a time standpoint? Would you think
Yeah,
that that's something
so
that's needed?
right. So normally, unless people are having trouble sleeping, they don't want to read legislation. But but if you look at this bill, there's passport is the easy one, right? Because you've already proven you're a citizen. It says you're a citizen. There are real ID driver's licenses in some states that identify people as citizens. So there are documents that work by themselves. But just like when we get a new job, there is a whole list of documents that people can use in various combinations. And this isn't just go get a passport to prove you're a US citizen. There are a large number of documents that can be used, sometimes two at a time in combination, like a Social Security card and another identification, for example, just like when you get a job and fill out an I-9 form and at a new company. So this is pretty common experience for Americans. Does it mean that we couldn't find one person out in the hinterlands who hasn't done this before? No, that is not what it means. But again, we expect states to help ease those people into these systems and to make these things easy to get. To make your vital statistics documents available. I have daughters who've given birth at home. Well, if you're not in a hospital when you give birth, you have to go through different hoops to get a birth certificate. That is true. And that's a state level responsibility. That's where it's always resided. And we expect states to facilitate this. So I would also note that in the bill, for things like uh, where there are disputes, people get to vote, just like under many state laws today. They can vote a provisional ballot and deal with the paperwork after the fact so that their ballot is in, it gets counted, and they're not held up from participating in a particular election. For example, for those states that do same-day voter registration. Now, you can do all of this proof while you're there to vote. There's no obstruction to that. But if you can't, you can still vote and deal with the demonstration of the paperwork after the fact so that everyone's vote does get counted.
I appreciate you clarifying and saying that. And again, your time too. Got one more question for you. And that would just be, what do you see happening next here? Obviously, this has been so
Sure.
highly debated from both sides of the aisle at this point. And you mentioned a lot of people have their eyes on this to see what's going to happen. What are the next steps, in your opinion, and what can happen with this?
So let's just briefly look back at kind of where we've come from. Chuck Schumer is the Democratic leader in the Senate. And a week ago, he was calling this whole effort Jim Crow 2.0. Now, even the Washington Post has issues with things like that because it's so outrageous. Well, this week, he's saying, well, we could agree to voter ID. So I think the public debate and the American people learning what is and is not in this bill. A lot of myths are being thrown out there. For example, oh, it'll make it hard for married women to vote. Hillary Clinton keeps throwing this one out. Completely false. And walking through some of the issues that you and I talked about, all real live issues, all solvable, all already exist in other parts of our lives, and how that plays into this bill. I think as those get discussed, debated, and the truth is laid out there, progress is being made. For example, the Democrats gradually coming around on voter ID, something that even their own base supports, so no surprise. But I'm hopeful that as this goes forward, I understand they're going to debate through the weekend, that more votes will be picked up and that people will talk more about solutions to the implementation along the lines of some of the questions you had for me. And I think even senators need to hear that. And everybody watching, you and I think ought to call Tim Kaine's office and ought to call Mark Warner's office and tell them you want your elections secured with these basic steps of making sure only citizens are registering to vote and that everyone has a voter ID to participate in our elections. Those are very basic things, and folks should call their senators and tell them that's what they want.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time here today because you're right. I think there are a lot of people who have questions about it because a lot of the messaging that has gone out. So we appreciate you
Sure.
taking the time to dive into it and answering my questions here this morning.
Well, and I
Again, this
appreciate the
is
opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Again, Ken Cuccinelli, the National Chairman of Election Transparency Initiative. We thank you so much, and seeing how long this may go, and we'll have to have you back at some point, okay?
Glad to do it.
All right. Take
Have a
care,
good
sir.
one.
Have a great day. Appreciate you. So good to hear from him. Again, I think, the more and more this conversation is out there and debated, people can get a sense of what is particularly in the bill and what they can expect to see. Again, right now you have from Democrats who have pretty consistently said that they are not fully willing to give up the votes needed to get across that 60. But again, we'll see what happens when the vote does come across. They do, at this point, need that 60 threshold in the Senate for this to move forward.